And so this seemed pretty symbolic, right, of how you might think you've buried your issues and buried the past, and yet it's coming back up because it actually hasn't been taken care of. Hello, thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Die My Love by Ariana Horowitz, published in 2012, and I'm comparing it with the new movie directed by Lynn Ramsey, released in 2025. And with my book versus movie videos, I'll end by picking which one I preferred, which one wins. But I'm actually going to do that right here at the start while also sharing my spoiler-free thoughts on each of these. And to cut right to the chase, for me, the movie wins. And while I did like the story in the book, and there is a narrative to it, it felt a bit too poetical and it's just constant stream of consciousness, which I like these writing styles in books, but I prefer when it's maybe sprinkled throughout, whereas when it's just constant, that's just not a favorite of mine, and that is what this book is doing. And she does do a good job at making the reader feel the disoriented, detached way that she is feeling, and so she does convey that very well. And while I can appreciate that, at the same time, like the detached aspect, even though she herself is feeling detached from who she is, from her husband, her child, like the events of her life, she's very detached from in many ways. And yet I, the reader, don't necessarily want to feel detached from the characters because then it makes me not care. And so she herself was an unlikable person. She's also very unwell. And so you also just pity her. But I was somewhat invested in what was happening with her, but I did not feel connected to the husband at all, and I didn't care about him or their relationship because the book didn't make me want to care. Even the relationship with her son, I wasn't invested in, and so I understand the purpose of the detached style, and yet I want a book where I feel attached to the characters. So ultimately, while I can appreciate what this book is about and what she's going for, it just isn't my personal preference. But if you have read it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I will say her writing style, well, maybe not her writing style. Basically, it was kind of reminding me of Ottessa Moshfegh, who I do love. I've read all of her books, and so I do like her writing, but she often writes about unlikable female characters who are struggling in one way or another, and it's making them act strange and erratic. And so that is kind of what we're getting here. And so I think if you do like Ottessa Moshfegh, you should give this one a shot, and maybe you'll be into it. But again, even compared to Ottessa Moshfegh, this one is a bit more artsy, I guess you could say, a bit more abstract. And so yeah, ultimately I preferred the movie because it stays true to the book while making me more invested in what was happening, and I cared more and I felt more connected to both the woman and the husband in the movie, whereas that was not the case in the book. And also I get the book, the point isn't to make you feel connected to the husband because this is about the woman. So I understand like that's not what this book is about, and yet I did appreciate caring more about him and feeling more invested in their relationship in the film. And I would also say that both characters are more likable in the movie and each feel more relatable in one way or another. At times in my life and in my relationships, I have had moments where I felt more like Grace, which, by the way, in the book, we don't know their names. Whereas in the movie, the mother, the woman, her name is Grace, and her partner, boyfriend, and then he becomes her husband, his name is Jackson. But yeah, there have been times when I have felt like Jackson, but also times when I felt like Grace to varying degrees. And so while these two characters feel like an over-dramatization of people in some ways, at the same time, they were kind of relatable. And while these two characters are more likable in the movie than they had been in the book, they still have a number of issues going on, clearly. But I kind of think it's a good, healthy thing to see yourself in messed up people when you're, reading books or watching movies, because even the best person on the planet is messed up in some way or other because we're all human. And that's just part of being human, is having issues. And so I think when you're able to see those negative parts of yourself in a movie, that seems like a good thing to me because you're acknowledging it and realizing it and accepting it. And from there, you can hopefully improve and grow for the better. At least that's my hope. So yeah, both book and movie, are strange and sad, but I would highly recommend the movie. Fantastic performances, the music, the sound design, like visually, it's just incredible. I loved this movie so much. And I do think if you love the movie, I do think the book is worth looking into. And also, again, if you like Otessa Moshfegh and if you like stream of conscious, weird kind of books, then you might be into this a bit more than I had been. So yeah, I wouldn't discourage people from reading it, but at the end of the day, I did prefer the movie, and the movie is one I would highly recommend. And from here on out, I will now get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So for those who don't know the story, so Grace and Jackson are about to have a baby. By the way, the book begins when the baby is already born and kind of jumps around, whereas the movie has more of a structured flow. But they're moving into his dead uncle's house, and things seem fine. But when the baby is 6 months old, she is feeling stir crazy, and they moved to the middle of nowhere in Montana from New York. And so she's struggling with that change as well as being a mother, and she just feels invisible and unhappy. And Jackson is also reluctant to have sex with her, and his father, Harry, also died shortly before the baby was born, and she had been close to Harry, and so she has that going on as well. And these aspects are more specific to the movie because in the book, the main character, the author, she is from Argentina, but she is living in France with her partner and their baby. And his mother does live nearby, and she was also recently widowed, and yet the main character hadn't been close to the father or not particularly close to the mother either, and so that's different. But also they're not living in his dead uncle's house, and the uncle committed suicide in the movie. However, we do hear about a neighbor in the book who committed suicide by shooting himself in the arse, which is morbidly funny, and that is how they say the uncle died in the movie. But in both book and movie, she is self-destructive and violent as a way to let out all of these emotions that don't have an outlet. And in the book, she is also clearly suicidal and talks often of wishing she were dead. And at one point, she ends up having an affair with a married man who lives nearby. And this was literal in the book, whereas in the movie, the motorcycle guy, he felt more symbolic. And I don't know necessarily whether he was real or not, but in the book, he is real. And so she's having an affair while also being very self-destructive, and ultimately in both, she ends up being put into a hospital, like a mental hospital, and she is let back out eventually. However, the hospital didn't help at all, and so she's still having problems. And then from here, the book and movie have a different ending, so I will be talking about them separately a little later in the video. And the book begins with her looking at her husband and son from a distance, and there is sun in her hand that makes her think of a knife, and she wishes it were a knife so she could kill herself. And she's also thinking how their baby wouldn't even exist if her boyfriend had just finished on her back instead. And so just right away in the book, you're realizing that she is not in a good mental headspace with her, violent suicidal thoughts, her detachment, feeling so separate and feeling like she doesn't belong. And then also boiling down the existence of your child to that moment. Even though I get it's accurate and, that's where babies come from kind of a thing. And yet at the same time, again, making his existence just about that single moment just tells you the headspace she is in. And there's a lot of talk of animals, which is something I will get into later, but I do want to share this quote from the first page of the book. They're already chopping wood for the cold season. People here prepare for winter like animals. Nothing distinguishes us from them. Take me, an educated woman, a university graduate. I'm more of an animal than half those dead foxes, their faces stained red, sticks propping their mouths wide open. A normal woman from a normal family, but an eccentric, a deviant, the mother of one child with another on its way, though who knows at this point. And by the way, she never does give birth to another baby, so I guess this line at the start is just to show that she isn't reliable in what she tells us. And we get a scene later in the movie that is similar to this opening scene in the book, where she is out walking on all fours, looking at her husband and baby from a distance. And in the movie, she is holding a literal knife, and she's being a little reckless with how she's handling it when she shows up. And so I thought this scene in the movie did a really good job of encompassing all that this moment in the book was conveying to us. Like the violence, the detachment, the animalistic nature of herself, and also how her husband isn't connecting with her. And this can be seen as a movie about postpartum depression, and it is to some extent, but I think it is one that is more widely relatable than just that. But also, she seems like someone who had problems even before the baby was born. And I want to share a Letterboxd review that I actually thought worded this very well. As a mother of two, I expected something rooted in the postpartum experience, but this felt far more like a portrait of depression and disintegration than of early motherhood itself. The focus isn't on the tangible struggles of caring for a newborn, but on the quieter, more interior crisis of losing yourself in the process. We rarely see her struggle with her baby. Instead, we watched her battle with herself against the slow erosion of identity, autonomy, and connection. I was most compelled by the way it examines marriage, the quiet unraveling that occurs when parenthood magnifies every fault line, fundamentally altering the landscape between two people and pulling them into strange, often painful territory. And yeah, I myself have never had kids, and yet I could relate to the emotions Grace feels at times. I felt unhinged. I felt like I could just burst from having so much anger and frustration and just tension within me and not having an outlet for it. And that scene when she destroys the bathroom, like there's times when I've maybe not quite as extreme as she went, but there's times when I almost want to act out in some way like that. However, I always tell myself like, no, you need to keep yourself restrained. And then I just keep it all inside, which, I mean, I'm maybe slightly exaggerating. I do communicate myself and my feelings, but at the same time, I've experienced that where you just feel like you have so much pent up inside and it just needs to get out, But then I could also definitely relate to Jackson, specifically in the movie, because being with someone who acts erratically and who is self-destructive and who is overwhelming and embarrasses you, and yet you stay with them and you just feel like you were at your wit's end. And he is also, to be fair, he is also just making the wrong choices constantly and disregarding her in many ways. And then we have that scene when he's having a panic attack after she has jumped in the pool while at that party. And it's funny because she is the one who then comes up and is able to calm him down. And so she is the cause of his panic, and yet she's also able to calm him. And so I thought that was a great scene. And we do see in the movie their life before the baby is born. And we also get moments throughout where we see the connection they have. And, in the beginning, they have this like animalistic, passionate, intimate life. And there's also times when they're both crawling on the ground together. And at that point in the movie, when they're doing that is when he suggests they get married. Which, was that a good choice to marry her? It seems like oftentimes people get married first, and then when things aren't going well, they're like, let's have a baby, thinking having a baby will fix everything when really it won't. But here they did the opposite, where they had a baby first and then issues arise. And it's almost like he's suggesting they get married in hopes that that will fix their problems, which of course it doesn't. But in this moment in the field, when they're acting like animals, that was like one of the most sweetest, touching moments in the film, I thought. And also at their wedding, there's a point when they're both crawling. And so when you see them in these moments, you're like, yeah, they just need to be weirdos together. And yet she inevitably takes it too far and she gets too drunk and he once again ends up being embarrassed by her. And in the book, we didn't get any sweet moments between them. And so again, that's one reason why I didn't really care about their relationship in the book, because we never saw those sweet moments. And in the book, she is the one who suggests they get married, and it wasn't romantic or touching at all. It wasn't tender at all. She just walks in and he's watching TV and she says like, let's get married. And he's like, sure. And that's how it plays out in the book. And so, yeah, the movie did a better job at showing this romantic yet unhealthy dynamic they have. They love each other, and yet they don't seem like a good match. And we do see how he minimizes what she is going through in so many ways, which probably just further makes her feel the need to act out. And this isn't a movie that I would say plays it safe. I think it's very uncomfortable. And while it has dark humor, yeah, it's not an enjoyable movie to sit through. It's pretty intense. But I did think that maybe they shied away to fully showing what we see in the book of how she dislikes motherhood and she regrets having the baby at all and wishes he didn't exist, basically. Not necessarily that she wishes him harm, but just that she hates being a mom at the end of the day. And I want to share a section from the book where we read, I have been needing the loo since lunch, but it's impossible to do anything other than be a mother. Enough already with the crying. He cries and cries and cries. I'm going to lose my mind. I'm a mother, full stop. And I regret it, but I can't even say that. Who would I say it to? To the boy sitting on my lap, sticking his hand in my plate of cold leftovers, playing with a chicken bone? No, leave that alone, you'll choke. I chuck him a biscuit. He gives it back. My mouth is full of saliva, of crumbs. My arm has a piece of tomato stuck to it. I put another biscuit in his mouth, and before he's finished this one, he chokes. I take no responsibility for anything he might think of me. I brought him into this world, and that's plenty. I'm a mother on autopilot. He's whining now, and it's worse than his crying. I lift him up and give him a fake smile, clenching my teeth. Mummy was happy before the baby came. Now Mummy gets up each day wanting to run away from the baby while he just cries harder and harder. And we do get a scene in the movie I liked where after she breastfeeds the baby, she goes into what is supposed to be her writing room. However, she has been unable to write and she just can't do it. And in the book, she also says how she can't read anymore either. And so she's lost this part of herself that was once such a key part of her identity. But in the movie, she's flicking the ink onto paper and then her breast milk mixes in with the ink. And so I viewed this as showing how motherhood is infiltrating her other passions, her other interests, and is kind of ruining them, or at least changing them. Like how motherhood is all consuming and it gets into everything and changes everything in your life. But both book and movie, like I said earlier, also have a lot of animal themes going on. And I hadn't thought this, and I mean, okay, so the book was reminding me of Night Bitch to some extent because it's about a mother who was struggling with her identity, right? And maybe leaning more towards the violence within herself. Whereas this one felt darker than Night Bitch, but also Night Bitch is clearly about struggling to be a mom and having postpartum, where again, here, like seems like she has a lot of other things going on. But the movie was making me think of Night Bitch a lot because of how animalistic Grace is. And again, she's crawling on all fours oftentimes. And just the visuals we get in the movie of nature and animals was just so well done. But in both book and movie, the husband gets them a dog, which she does not like. And then at one point he tells her to get in the car because they need to talk. And she has the dog in there as well. And while driving, he hits a stag because in the book, it is a stag that she sees and like feels a connection to. Whereas in the movie, it's a horse. And so it is a horse that they hit in the movie. But then the dog had also been in the car, and the car accident causes the dog to be injured. And so they bring it inside the house. And that night, the dog will not stop crying because of this injury it has. And so she tells him in both. She's like, you need to put that out of its misery and shoot it. Also in the movie, she says, I don't remember the exact line, but it's something like, something you love is in pain. Like, you need to do something about this. But I thought it was funny because it's like, who is she referencing? Like, is she saying like, I'm in pain because this dog is annoying, so shoot it? Or is she saying that the dog is in pain? And so I just thought it was interesting that it's like, does she really care that the dog is in pain? Or is she just focusing on how annoyed she is by the dog crying? But in both, he's like, no, like, I'll take it to the vet in the morning. And so she takes it upon herself to shoot the dog. And in the book, she just shoots it right there in the kitchen and then goes back upstairs and leaves the body, which was pretty shocking. And I don't like seeing animals hurt or killed in movies or books. But I was glad that the movie didn't shy away from this scene. They make it a tad bit better because she takes the dog outside to shoot it. But yeah, she shoots this dog. And kind of like Night Bitch, in the book, there's a scene when she graphically kills their cat. And so that scene in the book in Night Bitch is very symbolic. And I think we can see that as well with the dog in this story too, because perhaps we know the horse represents her in many ways, right? And so the car hits the horse, and yet the horse just gets up and keeps on running. Whereas the dog is also injured, and yet the dog is not able to keep going. And so maybe the horse representing her shows her resiliency and how she just gets up and won't stop and keeps going. Whereas the dog, I don't know that the dog would represent her husband. I feel like that's too extreme to say that. And yet the fact that the horse is able to get up and keep going despite having been hit, and yet the dog is not, like the dog is weaker. And so maybe it doesn't represent her husband necessarily, but maybe just society, or I don't know, maybe it does represent her husband, but I do feel like it is symbolic. And also in the movie, after she shoots the dog is when she then kisses the motorcycle man for the first time. And throughout the whole first bit of the film, he felt like a figment of her imagination. And we later see him in a parking lot and he might be real. Like maybe he's a real guy she's actually having an affair with, but I think he is very metaphorical in many ways. And considering he shows up right after she shoots the dog and they kiss, that definitely seems significant. Like by killing the dog, she has opened up a new part of herself that she had been keeping closed. And then again, like I said, I thought the movie did a great job at bringing to life these animalistic aspects of the book. And not just visually, but also with the sound. Because when she walks into her mother-in-law's house, we hear the flies buzzing and she keeps trying to kill the flies. And then we have the dog, which we hear whining and barking constantly. And then we, of course, have the horse, which we see and hear. And then in both, she also talks about how there are like rodents in the house. And so when he brings home the dog in the movie, she's like, we don't need a dog, we need a cat to get rid of these rodents. Whereas in the book, they actually do get a neighbor's cat and they bring it over in hopes that it will kill the mice. However, the cat is just useless and does nothing. But yeah, this theme of women getting in touch with their animal selves is something that I do love. And I think it's a good way to showcase the resiliency of women, just like nature is resilient. And the horse was resilient. And to be fair, men are resilient too, and there's plenty of movies about that, but this movie and book is about the woman's experience more specifically. And also, unlike men, women stereotypically aren't encouraged to embrace this animalistic side of themselves. And so that's why empowering books like Night Bitch, like that's what it's about, is embracing this animal side of yourself and embracing the violence in a healthy way. Whereas here, she's embracing her animal self and the violence, and yet it doesn't come across as empowering the way Night Bitch did. But then in both, like I said, her husband's parents live nearby, but his father has recently died. And in the book, we don't really hear much about him, but in the movie, we get some sweet moments between her and his name is Harry, and they even end up naming their son after him. And we also see moments between her and the mother-in-law, Pam, who I loved, played by Sissy Spacek, and we also see how she is going through something. Not the birth of someone, but rather the death of someone and how that is impacting her. And we even get a parallel scene of them walking at night with a weapon. The mother is carrying a gun and Grace has a knife. And in the movie, we do see how the mother-in-law is trying to help Grace. And I did find these moments very touching as well. And I like the scene when she is asking Pam how the uncle had killed himself, because Pam is the one who found the body. And Jennifer Lawrence, she gives such an amazing performance. But after she says like, oh, you're the one that found the body, right? Pam says, yeah. And then she's like, that must have been terrible. But the way she says this line, you can tell she doesn't think it must have been terrible and she doesn't care at all. She's just saying it because she knows that's what you're supposed to say. And then from here, she starts asking details about how he killed himself. And remember, this is a woman who is dealing with grief, death right now. And yet here she is being kind of inconsiderate, asking about how this other man had killed himself. And you can tell that Pam doesn't want to talk about this, and yet Grace keeps pushing it. And then, like I said earlier, I don't know if there was any truth to this, but she kind of just decides that the guy must have shot himself in the ass, which again is morbidly funny and did come from the book, although it was a neighbor, like I said, not an uncle. But yeah, this movie does have a lot of funny moments. Some are funny, some are just kind of sad, others are uncomfortable. It's kind of got a mix of it all. But yeah, there are quite a few lines that I did think were, again, it has some dark humor going on. But yeah, in both, she ends up in a mental institution. And in the book, it happens after they're married, and yet it sort of just kind of happened suddenly. And so you're just like, wait, what? Like, when did she show up here? And granted, throughout the book, you're like, man, this woman needs help. And so when you hear she's been committed, it seems like a good idea. But yeah, it's just like suddenly she's there. Whereas in the movie, again, it's after their wedding, but we see how she gets very drunk and is kind of acting crazy. And then she goes up to the suite where she is by herself and she's on the phone with the hotel front desk guy. And then he ends up showing up to the room and is playing the guitar for her while she dances. And then from there, we see her alone in the hotel suite, and she hits her head on the mirror and she has an injury. And then suddenly she's walking outside with her baby. And so Jackson drives up, and this is when he then takes her to a hospital. And in the book, he didn't show up on their wedding night, but in the book, it was because he was dropping the baby off with his mom. And then he just never shows up. And so she's like, like it's the baby's fault. I knew he would cause issues. And so she's left in the hotel suite waiting for him. But yeah, so she's in the hospital and it doesn't seem to be doing any good. And then in the book, at one point, she gets a day where she can leave the hospital to go to the beach with her baby and husband. And while at the beach, the husband is napping when suddenly she looks over and he has the biggest erection she has ever seen him with. And so she tries to wake him up because she's like, what are you dreaming? Like, why are you so aroused right now? Like, what's going on? And she's making a big ordeal of this. And so she gets the attention of the people around them, and then the cops end up being called. And from here in the book, we read, meanwhile, a group of people taking the whole thing very seriously informed the lifeguard on duty, who took it upon himself to intervene, having found a way to be useful for a moment. My husband had just woken up. He didn't defend me at all. He threw me to the lions, to the insults, to the string of obscenities that always come out of preachers' mouths, and carried away the little boy who had black sand on his nose and was spitting out pebbles. He left me with all those eyes on me. He didn't take any responsibility. He was a total coward. By this point, my husband wasn't hard anymore. In fact, he didn't even look like a man. And in the movie, we do get a scene where they go to the beach, but in the movie, these two young women come up to them and they're ignoring Grace, and they're just talking to Jackson about how cute his baby is and wanting to play with it. And he says, oh yeah, you guys can, go take him and stay in eyesight and you can play with him. And Grace is looking like, what is happening right now? Why are you letting them take our baby? But she doesn't say anything about it. And then from here, we get this dream sequence that involves Harry, the father-in-law, as well as the hospital, as well as previous events that we had seen. And then to move on to the book ending, and then I'll talk about the movie. So she is out of the hospital, and they are having a birthday party, a 1-year birthday party for their baby. And at first, it's going well enough. And yet at one point, she's had it and she locks herself in the bathroom. And by the way, in the book, what causes her to leave the party and go into the bathroom, she sees the garden outside and she's remembering how that is where the dog is buried. And so remembering that whole event, and they call the dog Bloody too. That's what she refers to it as, like its name. And so just thinking of the whole bloody mess, literally and figuratively, she suddenly is just wanting to leave. And so she runs into the bathroom. And the husband is trying to get her to come out, but she refuses. And then eventually when she does leave, she walks straight to the house of the man she has been having an affair with. And so she goes over there and is disrupting his life because he's married and has kids, has a daughter. And while she is there with him, her husband shows up, and we then read. And this section is kind of long, but I do want to read it all. Then my husband arrived on a motorcycle that was too small for him and made him look like he was 14. My 2 bulls, my stallions, my farm hands, suddenly together. No words were needed. My men understood each other with gestures alone, and off they went together into the open fields, stopping where I couldn't hear them. I saw the shadow cast by their bodies, the profiles of the 2 of them facing each other. I watched them squaring up for the duel, but then the tension dissipated and it was like 2 long-lost brothers catching up, reminiscing about their childhood in the family home, discussing how to settle their dead parents' debts. The sun began to set over their heads, the gentle light of dusk slowly tinting their bodies. A soft, steady rain fell on them, and as they talked, my life came and went. I don't know what was being said, only that they weren't raising their voices anymore. Something about the way they stepped a little to the side, the way they nodded their heads slightly, told me they'd understood each other. They had reached an agreement. The Siamese twins parted and one of them came towards me. I was trembling. Who would it be? Who would be my black market buyer? What would become of my life? In which home would I live? What would they call me, whoever had chosen me? He coughed, and I knew it was my husband, the most loyal of the 2. We walked towards the open-top car in silence. It was a silence more complete than all of those that had come before it. As we drove home in the rain, I noticed a row of cypresses. Are those new? I asked. They've always been there, he said. He didn't stop at the front door, but I could tell the party was over because a few blue balloons were drifting over the minefield that was our garden. Is the baby asleep inside? He's not a baby anymore, he said, but what I understood was he's not your baby anymore. We drove into the woods, the wheels leaving tracks in the earth. Not many animals were awake. The stag didn't appear, but I was there instead. He turned off the engine and relaxed, letting out a breath he'd been holding in for too long. So what do you want to do? A question was the last thing I'd been expecting. I thought the outcome had been positive or negative and that he'd tell me how much time I had left in weeks and days. I thought he'd cry. I hadn't been expecting a question. What do you think? But I couldn't say a word. Poor thing. And my whole life was a shrill whistle piercing his silence. The trees in the woods were like tigers in heat. I won't be able to forget, he said. And for the first time, he was serious. Another silence, this one more stifling than the last. The buzzing in my ears plummeted to the ground like a dead bird. There was nothing to say after the look he gave me. What could I possibly add? When he saw I wasn't going to put up a fight, he lit a cigarette and said, "Besides, they're expecting a child. 2, actually. They're having 2 tiny twins." And although we tried to stay serious, we couldn't help but laugh. About what? I don't know. The sound of the words 2 tiny twins, maybe. And what if we had one? Another child? The question gave him a coughing fit, and then we were in hysterics again. Another child. Us. The 2 of us sat there laughing together for the very last time like a happily married couple. I got out without opening the door. The convertible is a practical model for breakups, and he turned and saw me disappear into the undergrowth. At first I felt nothing but pain, the kind of pain a person doesn't share, not even with herself. I was in mourning for a long time, but there came a moment when, like the widow who unlocks her front door for the first time, who eats dinner in silence for the first time, who gets into bed alone for the first time, I felt a sadness that was exhilarating, wild. And I know I said earlier that I didn't always love the writing style of this book, but I did like this ending, and I thought it was beautiful in a way, and I thought it was kind of an incredible section, and how at first she's letting 2 men decide what's going to happen with her life, and yet ultimately she then makes her own decision and leaves, and it takes courage to end a relationship, right? Even a bad one. And so it's painful, and yet it's also, she feels exhilarated and wild, which of course is a word associated with animals. And so again, kind of beautiful, but also sad. And I like to think of it, she's also an unwell person. And so maybe her leaving this relationship, she'll benefit from that and be doing better. And yet at the same time, because she's so unstable, is this a good ending for her? I want to think it is, but I guess it is up to interpretation. Whereas in the movie, so while having more of a clear structure, I thought, than compared to the book, the movie actually gets more abstract with the ending. So here they are having a welcome home party for her, which seems like a bad idea. Like, she doesn't seem like the type who would want a lot of people over, but it's not a birthday party for their son. It's a party for her. And then partway through, she just leaves. And Pam is telling Jackson, like, just let her go, leave her be. But Jackson can't help himself, and he goes and follows her. And also, by the way, I should mention that at the party, so they had buried the body of the dog she killed, but at the party, another dog is digging up the bones of this dog. And so this seemed pretty symbolic, right, of how you might think you've buried your issues and buried the past, and yet it's coming back up because it actually hasn't been taken care of. And so all of these issues are just arising again. But he picks her up in a car, and at first they're singing along to a song called "In Spite of Ourselves," which is a song about 2 messed up people who are in love, but it's kind of a sweet song because in the lyrics, they're acknowledging all of the bad traits about their partner, and yet they're ending it with, like, "I don't care though, I love him and I'm not going to let him go," despite seeing how they're not a great person. And so it's a funny kind of a song, and also seems fitting for their relationship. But at one point they stop the truck, and then she just says, like, enough with this. And she walks off, and she walks into the forest, and she had a journal that she had written in while in the hospital, and she sets that on fire, which then causes the forest to catch on fire. And then she walks naked into the flames, and Jackson starts to follow her, but then he stops and just watches her walking into the flames. And first of all, while they're driving, he says, "Where are you?" And she says, "I'm right here, you just don't see me." And so this reoccurring theme of her feeling like not only has she lost her sense of identity, but also that she isn't being seen for who she is and what she wants and needs. She doesn't feel alive. She's depressed. Her life is mundane. She has lost her sense of purpose in many ways and doesn't feel alive. And so she is being destructive as a way to feel alive and prove she exists to herself and those around her. And oftentimes we see people acting erratically and it seems like, oh, they must have a death wish. But oftentimes it's not. I mean, in the book, she wants to die. But also, it's maybe not so much in the movie specifically. It's not so much that she wants to die, but that she's wanting to feel alive. And like she is right there. And so destruction is how she makes her presence known and how she makes herself feel alive. And then fire, in the end, that can have multiple meanings. So fire is destruction, of course, but it's also rebirth. And the most cliche symbol of this being a phoenix, which is an animal. And this movie has a lot of animal symbolism. So I think in some ways, the ending of the movie is still true to the book, and the fire is how the movie is showing what she described in the book. It's the end of something, their relationship, and that is painful, and yet it is also freeing, and she can be reborn anew and maybe better. Like seeing it as a positive ending, this is up to interpretation because also like part of me wants to see it as something positive, and yet it could definitely be seen as a negative thing because she has been so self-destructive throughout this whole movie, and then in the end she's walking into flames, like very clearly symbolic of destroying yourself, right? So I guess just let me know what you think, but I'm inclined to want to view it as a positive thing. And again, maybe see it as rebirth coming from destruction. Also in the movie, she makes a cake for herself for her party that says mommy's home. And earlier at the start for her son's 6-month cake, she bought one. And she's like, a real mom would have made a cake, which is a line that comes from the book. But here in the end, she does make the cake. But then as she's putting the cake out, the house has been cleaned up and it looks very different. Her time in the hospital, Jackson used that time to kind of fix the place up and it just looks totally different now. And so maybe she had been feeling invisible and like she didn't belong. And now seeing how changed everything is and her presence has been wiped clean from this home. And so now after making this cake, she's realizing that she doesn't belong and that she is invisible. And so that is why she leaves. But again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And then the title, by the way, so in the book, they call each other my love. And we read, we're one of those couples who mechanize the word love, who use it even when they despise each other. And then in the end at the party, when she locks herself in the bathroom, he is trying to get her to come out. And she's the one who's like, oh, like just die, my love. Whereas in the movie, we never actually hear the title said and they never actually call each other my love. But also I wanted to mention the scene when she's in the car and she's very, tense and stressed and the song is playing and she's like, turn this song off. I hate guitars. And he says, since when do you hate guitars? Like, who doesn't like guitars? And then later on near the end, a song is playing with a guitar and she tells him to turn it up. I love this song. And he says, I thought you hated guitars. And she's like, what? Since when? I love guitars. And so I thought this was kind of funny, but it also shows how lost she is and indecisive, and what annoys her one minute, she loves the next. And also there's a scene when she is talking to another mom at the party in the end, and this woman had seen her earlier. So after she's out of the hospital, this woman is like, oh, you look so much better than last time. And it's kind of funny because then Grace is like, so do you. You look so much better. So I did think that was kind of funny. But then another night bitch comparison. So we get scenes with other moms who are like more cheery and put together, and night bitch makes fun of them, only for then in the end, we see their humanity too, and they aren't just there for a punchline. Whereas I felt like this other woman in Die My Love was seen in more of a negative light, which is fine for this movie and for what this one is conveying. But we do also get her mother-in-law, Pam, and other older women talking about motherhood. And so in some ways, it does show the communal shared experience of being a mom, but not in a sweet, we're all in this together kind of a way that Night Bitch had. And Night Bitch, it didn't come across as cheesy though. Like, I love that book and I love the message and I love the connection between the women. But yeah, Die My Love isn't one that has like a more uplifting communal message about motherhood and being a woman necessarily, because Grace herself never feels one with these other women. And then Lynn Ramsey, she also directed We Need to Talk About Kevin, and that has been on my book versus movie list to cover for so long. And how much I loved this movie definitely made me want to cover that one sooner rather than later. So maybe early next year, I will end up doing that. And then I'm also very curious what awards this movie gets, because it was just fantastic in so many ways. And so we have the performances, of course, which are incredible. But then also, like I said, the music and just, yeah, I was just impressed with everything about this movie, basically. And so it is one I would highly recommend. And let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And if you have read the book, let me know what you made of that and how you thought it compared with the film. And yeah. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you next time. Bye.